From Newsweek World Headquarters here at the top of the World Trade Center in New York City, I'm Carlo Versano, Newsweek's Director of Politics and Culture. I've got one of my reporters, one of my favorite reporters, Mandy Tahiri, here with me today. Mandy, we're talking Tylenol. We're talking autism. We're talking headaches. I have one. I have a splitting headache, as a matter of fact. And it seems like the country has a bit of a headache at the moment. But before we get into sort of like my take on the whole autism and Tylenol connection, I do want to go to you because you have been sort of following the online reaction to the president's big announcement this week that he says there is a direct link between Tylenol use and autism in fetuses. So what are they saying out there on the World Wide Web?
The World Wide Web is also experiencing a headache. It's a bit chaotic. His announcement was embraced, but it was also protested. That hasn't fallen perfectly along political lines. We did see Senator Bill Cassidy, who is a Republican and a physician. He came out and sort of was like, where is the evidence for this? You know, he's pushing against
Cassidy,
it.
by the way, who voted to confirm RFK.
Right. So like really one of their own in a way. But then we also have seen, liberal women on TikTok who are pregnant and they're taking videos of themselves, showing their bellies and, protesting, saying they're not going to listen to advice from people that don't have medical degrees, RFK and Trump, and they're like chewing Tylenol in the videos. That's also gotten backlash on the other side, people being like, how could you, why would you do this? Why would you set yourself up for this? And then there's also been conservatives on Twitter that have been resharing a 2017 tweet from Tylenol that said they don't recommend their products for pregnant women. And that was reposted by HHS. So that has really hit all sort of corners of social media because once it's at the top, it's everywhere, basically.
It's funny because they're using that tweet as though they'd like discovered some. It's right here on the box, the Tylenol box. It says, if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, ask a health professional before use. So, I mean, they say that about everything, but that's not the point. Right. Is not that. The point is that the president and RFK coming out and saying there's a direct causal link between autism and women who take Tylenol during pregnancy. It's linking this as though it is directly responsible for the rise in this disorder that we still don't know really very much about, right?
Right. And also that disclaimer is on basically everything for women. It could be like, at this point, you could honestly put a water bottle with it. Like, it's like almost everything is because it's just like, it's such a large field of study and there's not enough probably studies to be done to actually follow through on things that it's like, who knows what. Like, there's just so many boundaries that are drawn on pregnant women for what they can and can't do. So it's not an unusual thing to say, please, reference your medical.
Right. No, exactly. And this was my wife's reaction to this. She had a very strong reaction to this on this announcement because she was just like, so what, like we just said, what am I supposed to do if I'm pregnant? Right. So I can't take any of these, any of these drugs. But anyway, let's back up for a second, because if you're just joining us, you may be like, what are these guys going off about, right? I haven't really been paying attention to the news. Autism, Trump, Tylenol. Back on Monday, all those days ago, President Trump had a press conference that he had touted a day earlier when he was at speaking at Charlie Kirk's memorial, that he had found, quote, the answer to autism. So with noted public health luminaries, RFK Jr. and Dr. Oz standing next to him, the president did basically a free association routine from the White House in which he linked the use of Tylenol to a higher risk of autism in children. And he also went off script and freelanced a bit, suggesting that the childhood vaccine schedule was to blame too. And I thought this was one of the more interesting lines from that press conference.
Since 2000, autism rates have surged by much more than 400%. Instead of attacking those who ask questions, everyone should be grateful for those who are trying to get the answers to this complex situation. And the first day all of these great doctors behind me were there, I told them, this is what we have to find out. Because when you go from 20,000 to 10,000, and then you go to 12, there's something artificial. They're taking something. And by the way, I think I can say that there are certain groups of people that don't take vaccines and don't take any pills that have no autism.
So they're talking about the Amish there, if that wasn't clear. So put aside for a moment the sort of absurdity of using the Amish as your control group. Mandy, probably a fifth grader would understand that a community that doesn't participate in modern society is probably going to have different levels of diagnosis and reporting when it comes to different diseases, they're not going to report them the same way we do, right? And with autism, it's pretty clear in the literature that at least one of the reasons behind the rise in the disorder is because we report it much more, and the criteria for diagnosis is much larger than it used to be, right? So, I think for the White House to kind of ignore the criteria issue is kind of shows you how much, work they put into this big announcement. And you could kind of really tell that Trump's heart wasn't really in this either. He couldn't even bother to learn how to pronounce acetaminophen.
First, effective immediately, the FDA will be notifying physicians that the use of well, let's see how we say that. Acetaminophen. Is that okay?
If you look at the actual statement that the FDA put out that was in conjunction with this announcement, it makes it very clear in the fine print. I'm going to read it right now. It says, quote, "A causal relationship has not been established, and there are contrary studies in the scientific literature." So again, the difference between associational and causal is very important in this thing. There is no causal link between Tylenol and autism. So Amanda, if you're pregnant, you're already supposed to avoid ibuprofen and aspirin, right?
Totally.
So now they're saying that you have to avoid those and also Tylenol. So if you've got terrible cramps in your first trimester, if you've got a terrible flu in your second trimester, if you've got terrible back pain in your third trimester, well, let the president tell you what you should do.
The word tough it out, it's easy for me to say tough it out, but sometimes in life, with a lot of other things, you have to tough it out also. Don't take Tylenol. Don't give Tylenol to the baby. When the baby's born, they throw it at you. Here, give them a couple of Tylenol. They give them a shot. They give them a vaccine.
So what are women supposed to do? They get no help when the kid comes, and now when the fetus is in their womb, they have no way to manage their pain, right? So I guess they're supposed to tough it out.
Yeah, it seems quite impossible, honestly. Yeah, you're forced to carry to term. A lot of abortion rights, really, those are tightening. And then when you are carrying, you have at least 9 months of pretty much pain that you're just going through. And this is also just adding confusion to the medical community. Obviously, women are always in contact with their OBs. They're always in contact with, who they have access to, but not every woman has that much access to medical care. And that's like a huge problem. So if you're hearing these things and you don't know what to do and you're in pain, there's a concern among some medical officials that people are going to turn to sort of unregulated options, which could be a host of things. We don't know. It could be opioids. It could be, herbal remedies. It could be things that we don't actually have even any studies on. And so that's a concern if you're going to take your own pain relief into your own hands. What does that mean?
I know you have 2 older sisters. You have 2 brothers. You've got a lot of nieces and nephews.
Yes.
You're one of 5 yourself.
Yeah.
And I know that you come from sort of your family comes from a medical background.
Yes.
So give me a little bit of what's the Tahiri household have to say about this?
The Tahiri household was pretty upset, I will say. We have 2 separate sets of twins in our family, which both of the mothers were in a bit of pain for pregnancy. They're both very small, like under 5'3", and they're big. They're carrying over 8-pound babies, which is really incredible. Everyone in my family took Tylenol when they were pregnant, and everyone was okay with that. There shouldn't be sort of their basis was that, people can regulate what they eat. They can regulate, like the temperatures they're supposed to be at, what they're supposed to consume in every shape and form. And they really believe they spoke with their medical professionals. They talked to their OBs all the time. They were okay to take it when they had a fever. There's a big concern if you are pregnant and you have a fever and you let that run.
Right.
So, the flip side of this is when you're not taking Tylenol for something that's pretty serious, there can also be serious impacts from that. So there's a lot of side effects that are sort of affiliated with this. And then my dad on the medical side, he's really concerned from, what we were talking about earlier, like what are people going to do? Because when you're told you can't do something or you have this fear that what you're going to do is going to result in something that you maybe are trying not to have necessarily, or you don't want this outcome, then it's like, what am I supposed to do? I'm going to turn to Google. I'm going to go down these, we all know that our searches and the ways that we can get information now is completely siloed.
Right.
So like who can we trust? We have these officials that are making decisions that aren't physicians. So who do you then trust? And that's a concern.
Yeah. And I think the thing with RFK, love him or hate him, I don't, for him to be the messenger on something like this, his whole thing has always been that chronic diseases and conditions are all environmental, right? So it has to
Mhm.
do with things that we eat, things that we're exposed to in the air. And I'm sure that that's true in a lot of cases. And I'm sure there's, there are conditions that are completely environmental. But the idea that autism is one of those is something that is not a trusted, it's not something that anybody really in the medical community agrees with. They don't really
Right.
know, right? I
Right, it's
mean,
kind of a
it
mystery
still
at
is.
that
And I
point.
mean, and I want to be clear, like, I don't have autism in my family, but I know people who do, and I see, I can totally understand why people really are sort of thirsting for, you know, answers to this. And,
Mhm.
and I guess you could say, good on Trump for at least making this a, a priority in his administration. I think they just jumped the gun here, right? That's sort of my takeaway from this week.
Yeah, two things. One, the other comment I would say on like what are women supposed to do is there is this overwhelming pressure again with like what you can and can't do, that there's a guilt a lot of pregnant moms feel. Like they don't know what's going to happen, and a lot of things are unexplained that can
Right.
happen, you know? And so this is just sort of like adding on to this pressure that a lot of women feel, which also is not that good to be stressed when you're pregnant. So like
Sure.
just adding more burden in that sense. And then the second thing is sort of, yes, I think the gun was jumped, and that is always sort of a concern with medical things because stuff flies. We work in news, we know it goes everywhere. But also there is this, so there's some conservative influencers I was following that were sort of posting their exchanges with their mom, being like, "Did you take Tylenol with me?" in sort of a quote unquote cheeky way, like is that why I'm the way I am almost? And so there's like sort of this timing of like what is autism and what does it mean to be autistic, and like are people embracing that, is it raising awareness for this, is
Right. Is
the
it further stigmatizing it? Is it making it
right.
into a joke? I mean, I heard high school kids are calling each other Tylenol babies now.
Right. And so it's sort of like where is this going to land in the scheme of like how we're approaching this
Right.
disorder in general?
So I want to talk for a minute about the politics of this because, with Trump, everything is political. He doesn't really do anything unless there's sort of a political angle to it, as most presidents do, although he does it to the extreme. But, so RFK has been under pressure from MAHA, right? Make
Mhm.
America Healthy Again, which is sort of this like, I don't know, I guess you'd say it's part of MAGA, but it's its own thing. And there's
Mhm.
plenty of people on the left who sort of consider themselves part of this MAHA movement. To deliver, they've pressured him to deliver some sort of findings on autism because he's been promising it forever. This has been his thing forever,
Nonstop,
right?
yeah.
So we talked about how his whole thing is about chronic diseases being environmental. So, you can see how he sort of glommed onto this Tylenol theory, which, by the way, they didn't just like make it up out of thin air, right? There, as we said, there are associational studies showing a potential link between these two things. This is something that's been studied and talked about, particularly on the right, for a very long time. But I think it's pretty clear that they saw this and they were like, okay, this is what we can go with. So he thinks that they do this. The medical establishment scoffs at it. And then what that does is it just sort of like solidifies this belief in MAGA and Make America Healthy Again, that the medical community is captured either by the pharmaceutical industry or they're just, implicitly anti-Trump no matter what he does. So it's almost like this like circular firing squad.
Well, it's kind of almost a repeat of like the bleach and COVID thing,
Right.
like it's not dissimilar than what he's already sort of done. And this tension between the medical community and him is still ever present.
Right. Now that's an interesting point I actually hadn't thought about because it was back in those horrific early COVID days. It basically, and the problem with Trump being in power at that point was that at that point he was already so polarizing, having been in office for 3.5 years at that point, that it's almost like anything he said, half of the country was going to believe it to be false or a lie or misinformation or something. So it's very difficult for him to play this sort of like unifier in chief, whether it's talking about a condition that afflicts all these people or political violence or whatever it is. But anyway, yeah. So I mean, there's no, again, back to the politics. None of this there's no skin off Trump's back, right? He gets to look like he's delivering on a campaign promise. RFK throws a bone to the base. They probably lay off of him for a while. But it's back to what you said. Who gets hurt, right?
Yeah. And you could also argue that members of the medical community also are kind of, taking some heat from this because they're kind of like losing some of their quote unquote legitimacy from certain groups. And like things like this are hard to repair after a while. Like once this is out, it's kind of out. And again, yeah, we don't know much, which is the problem. And like if Trump were to really expand and go into these studies and like what he's really finding, but yeah, we spoke to someone who was, one of the lead ones and is like, don't take this as holy grail. So it's just the like constant conflicting information just really it ends up hurting women, of course, but also members of the medical community, because now we can't like really engage with them.
Right. Well, I mean, this is public health policy in the Trump 2.0 era, right?
Yeah. And the only other thing I would say is that Trump, while it's no skin off his back, it's clear that he timed this announcement. Like, he announced this at Charlie Kirk's memorial, which was a very heavily Maha crowd. And we saw them really celebrate RFK when he came and spoke. So it was clear that he was sort of like setting this up to the community that he knows is going to receive it the best, and then tee it up for his next announcement.
It's interesting you say that, because just if you're just following us now, Mandy was at the memorial in Phoenix last weekend, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we were talking while it was going on, and one of the things that you sent over, it was, RFK actually, because it's hard to tell when you're watching on this live stream, right? And you were like, RFK got the biggest reaction from this crowd of any of the speakers, and they had some real hardcore MAGA speakers.
Well,
there.
He got the biggest in the cadence, but yes, it was still large. Like at the end, Don and Trump came after him, but yes.
Which is interesting because, he doesn't seem to be particularly popular, but he clearly does have, he has tapped into something on this Maha thing. Right.
Nor is he a good speaker, honestly. He's hard to listen to, and he's hard to understand, but he's also hard to follow. So it is kind of interesting that he would be the most celebrated.
Well, he was a Democrat until like 15 minutes ago, right?
Right.
Also a member of like, the most prominent Democratic family in the whole world. Okay, I do want to leave it there. Mandy, thank you so much for joining us. We will keep on the autism and Tylenol thing here at the 1600. But in the meantime, thank you guys for watching, listening, reading. And be good to each other and good to yourselves.